Coming up on DFE News, what's going on in Nevada? Echoes of the Las Vegas shooting in Reno. 2 have died. Also, they lost their military careers because of the COVID jab, but this former JAG's not stopping there. Kacy Dixon joins us to explain. And Planned Parenthoods and gender clinics closing all over the place. About 24. We'll tell you why. We've got news for you. Those stories and more right now on DFE News. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on DFE News. News done right. I'm Jeff Kirk. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment so everyone gets to see DFE News. So much is going on. Let's get right to it. What is going on in Nevada? That's the question on the minds of many after a shooter killed 2 and left several injured in Reno. He's been arrested. The shooting happened Monday around 7 in the morning outside the Reno Grand Sierra Resort and Casino in the Valet area. The gunman opened fire for 2 to 3 minutes before police arrived. Authorities say the shooter killed 2 people and injured 3 who were taken to the hospital. The Grand Sierra condemned the violence and expressed sorrow for the victims and their families. The mayor shared her condolences as well, and the police gave an update on the scene.
We received a report of an active shooter in the Valet area, the GSR. We responded to the scene, and within 4 minutes, we had located the suspect, and an officer-involved shooting had occurred. The suspect was taken to the hospital. I don't have an update as to his status at this time, but I do know that it was an adult male that was involved. Officers then located several victims of gunshot wounds and other injured parties that they began providing first aid and medical treatment to. REMSA and fire and medical team at the GSR all assisted with providing first aid, and we have several people that have been transported to the hospital. We don't have an update yet on exact numbers of injured people, and we don't have an exact number of their condition yet, or an exact description of their conditions yet, but we will later on.
Southeast of Reno in Las Vegas, you may remember, another shooting took place at a concert in October of 2017, which killed 60 and injured more than 400. A man was arrested for that shooting, but much of that event still remains a mystery. Debates have broken out across social media, including X, Facebook, and Reddit, about the recent cause of celebrity deaths. Food Network celebrity chef Anne Burrell was among a number of celebrities who died in the past week. She was a fierce supporter of vaccines and expressed frustration against the unvaccinated. Her stance had many wondering if the COVID vaccine had anything to do with her death, which was officially ruled a suicide. Separately, a star college tennis player died suddenly this past week, with the coroner ruling her death to be heart-related. Her death also sparked debate on social media platforms about whether it was linked to the vaccine. We may never know for sure if those or other deaths were related to the vaccine, but the losses are no doubt heartbreaking for their families and friends, and our thoughts and prayers are with them. Speaking of the COVID vaccine, if you or someone you know was in the military during the COVID pandemic, you probably already know the COVID vaccine mandate is no longer in place. But many troops had their careers negatively affected by refusing to take the shot, and some are still fighting to get some justice today. Joining us now is former Air Force JAG officer Kacy Dixon, who has been continuing the fight to bring accountability to those responsible. Kacy, you yourself were an Air Force officer. Were you still in uniform when the vaccine mandate was ordered? And what were your first thoughts when you saw that mandate first get issued?
I was still in uniform. I was serving as an active duty attorney in the Air Force. And my first thoughts about the mandate came actually before it came down, because I was pregnant in the COVID era. I had struggled for about 2.5 years to conceive my son. And so I had proactively sought information on the COVID vaccine, just to make sure that I was making the right decision for myself and for my unborn baby. And so I got very conflicting information from 2 different doctors, which was concerning to me. Because of that, I started looking into the vaccine more deeply, specifically looking at the packet insert and trying to figure out medically if there was anything that I should be aware of. And I'm not a doctor, so I didn't really discern anything from a medical standpoint, but a very clear legal issue became clear to me. And so when the mandates were coming down, those were my first thoughts, especially as an attorney. There's a legal issue here. These products have not actually been FDA approved, and that makes it unlawful for them to be mandated.
Yeah, can you explain a little bit more about the difference between an FDA approved vaccine and one that's only authorized for emergency use, and why does that make a legal difference?
So emergency use authorization is a much lower threshold of like safety testing and study. And the legal aspect behind EUA, emergency use authorized products, is there has to be a declared public health emergency. And during that public health emergency, there can't be any FDA approved product that already exists that can either treat or prevent whatever it is that's causing that public health emergency. So in this instance, when you looked at things like hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, that some doctors were claiming they were having, great success treating COVID with those. If it was determined that those successfully treated COVID, then there could not have been an authorization for the new vaccines to come online. So those products were largely vilified, even though there were studies from 2014 and earlier, specifically studying hydroxychloroquine as to coronaviruses and showing success in treating coronaviruses with hydroxychloroquine. But anyway, so that's the first step, is that there can't be anything on the market that could treat or prevent whatever's causing the public health emergency. And then part of the emergency use authorization, because it has not been fully vetted, because it is still technically experimental, there has to be informed consent, which means you have to be, and this is for all Americans, this is for every US citizen, you have to be given the option to accept or refuse that product without consequence, which includes not being threatened with job loss, not being threatened with, inability to access needed places like hospitals or grocery stores. And there is a provision that creates an exception for the military, where because of the unique nature of the military, because of possible national security implications, for the military alone, the president, and this is non-delegable, the president can waive your right to informed consent as a service member and say, even if you don't want to take this, you have to. But there are certain statutory requirements that have to be met for that waiver to issue. I don't believe that those requirements were met, but even if they were, the president in this case, President Biden at the time, elected not to issue that waiver. And so all service members retained their absolute right to informed consent and to decline the EUA products that the DoD possessed.
Kacy, for a lot of these service members, it seemed like they really ultimately did not have any choice, that they were either facing elimination from their career that they loved, their service to their country, or even close to retirement, losing all the benefits they had worked nearly 20 years or more to earn, between losing all of that and taking the vaccine, giving up on their principles, and for some individuals risking, if not a current pregnancy, but perhaps even the opportunity to become pregnant in the future. I mean, have you heard of individuals expressing these kinds of stories, or seen those types of events happening in your experience?
Daily. These people were put in untenable positions, and the way they were treated was awful. And we could spend an entire episode recounting unique situations, people who, young enlisted individuals with, minimal to no savings, being given days to vacate base housing, living in their cars with their spouses and children, people who were separated from their families over this. In my particular case, and I don't share this often, but, I fell under the stop order where I wasn't allowed to PCS. And my husband, who's also military, had orders. And he and my 4-year-old and my infant son were PCSing, and my orders were canceled. And for 5 months, I was not even contacted about whether or not I would be allowed to move to the location where my husband and my young children were stationed. And I mean, the position that puts you in as a mother to young children, especially, it's horrendous. And, that's my story. And frankly, my story is mild compared to many that I've heard throughout this process.
So for those troops who did not wish to take an experimental vaccine and obviously did not have an FDA approved vaccine available to take, what recourse did they have? What actions could they take to be removed from this spot that they were put in between the rock and the hard place?
So in theory, there are a lot of tools at service members' hands that they can use. Unfortunately, the system undermined all of these processes. So for instance, you could file an Article 138 complaint to your commander requesting redress of a grievance and, stating, hey, you are wrongfully or unlawfully trying to make me take this product. Those were basically summarily dismissed. You could file a complaint with the IG. You could seek an accommodation, which my thought on this was no one should have had to seek an accommodation because they already retained the inherent right to decline to accept the product without any kind of waiver. But because that was not being honored, they did have the option to seek medical or religious accommodations. Those processes were similarly captured and undermined. People were treated very poorly. People were, at 19 years, forced to make a very hard decision. And I know people who lost their careers at 19 years and did not make it to retirement. So it's, we talk about kind of the financial loss, the livelihoods, and that kind of thing, but there is a significant moral injury that's taken place. There are also significant physical injuries that have taken place, and those are the other stories that need to be shared. Individuals who are vaccine injured, young people like Carolina Stancic, who at 23 years old developed heart issues and now has a pacemaker installed. These are the types of stories that have not really reached the broader public that need to, so that people understand the extent of this, the emotional, physical, moral, spiritual harm that took place during these mandates. And, I hope that I will continue to speak about this until things are rectified. And, I would encourage others. And, there's a severe moral injury as well for people who did take the vaccine that didn't want to, even if they didn't suffer a physical injury. So I know that there's still a lot of resentment among people who are still in service over this. So there's a lot of, this was detrimental to the force in many ways. And, I'm hopeful, I remain hopeful that a lot of this will be rectified, but there's still a lot more work to be done.
So from what you've seen following those processes, did the military leadership properly follow the procedures as outlined that they should follow with regard to those particular waivers or those requests?
No, and the courts largely agreed with service members who filed suit. A lot of these lawsuits ended up being dismissed as moot because the mandate was eventually rescinded prior to, a determination on the merits of these cases. But, in the Navy case, the judge called the religious accommodation process a sham. He said that the process was theater. And one of the reasons he said that is because actually a whistleblower, he's a very good friend of mine now, Rob Green. He is still a serving active duty naval officer, but he was able to, as a whistleblower, bring forward information showing that the Navy had standard operating procedures where basically like a checklist, which is normal in the military, click this folder, open up this template, draft this memo, things like that. But essentially, the standard operating procedure had the individual going through the checklist, drafting denial letters before ever actually even opening the packet and reading the information from the requester's package. So that's a blatant undermining of the process. And there are also, we could do a whole hour-long segment on this kind of stuff, but I'll give you another example. In the Doster case, which was the Air Force religious case that ended up granting a preliminary injunction for Air Force members who had filed religious accommodation requests, there was, it was alleged on information and belief that at the Corona conference, which the name actually has nothing to do with COVID, but it's a conference where all the highest ranking generals in the Air Force meet annually. It was alleged that at that meeting, the then Secretary of the Air Force, Secretary Kendall, had directed all the MAJCOM commanders that religious accommodation requests for the vaccine would not be approved. And that is a direct conspiracy to undermine and deprive people of their constitutional rights. You have, as a service member, your constitutional rights. You also have a right to the same due process as any other citizen, including freedom of expression, freedom of religion. Under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, the ability to go through that due process, to have your request analyzed. And the burden is very high for the government to deny those types of requests if it's determined that you have a sincerely held belief. So to outright dictate that those will all be denied is a severe violation of rights, and even in my opinion, rising to the level of a criminal conspiracy to deprive rights.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kacy, you say you are still pursuing accountability for those who placed the mandate onto the troops and the unjust effects that it had on their careers. What kind of actions are you taking currently now to hold those responsible to account?
So right now, we have a big grassroots movement that has been very vocal. And, I think some of our efforts really contributed to the mandate being rescinded, to President Trump actually caring about this issue enough to issue his executive order saying that anyone kicked out because of COVID would be welcomed back and reinstated with back pay. The executive order is written, it's very brief, as most executive orders tend to be. And then, subsequent policy kind of fills in the specifics. Initially, some of the policy was a little bit lacking, but I will say that this administration, they have reached out to us. They have asked for our input. There were a couple of us that were even invited up to the Pentagon to provide feedback and input on how the policy could be strengthened. And some of the feedback we gave included some of these people are now 3 and 4 years out of the service. They're going to return, if they're reinstated at their same rank, to be junior now to their former peers. So, part of the policy needs to look at special promotion boards to get these people caught up to speed, focusing on getting them to schools, into command positions if they were on that track. A lot of people had flight hours that were cut, had command billets taken away. So there are a lot of other effects that happened. And it's a complicated and nuanced issue when you look at every single case. So we kind of raised some of the unique concerns, and, I think they've continued to update policy to try and fix some of that, but we continue to also be very vocal about accountability.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Hopefully this administration can right those wrongs. Kacy, we've had your information on the screen, so hopefully people are able to get in contact with you if they have any questions. Thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with us today.
Thank you very much.
Abortion provider Planned Parenthood announced it was closing several locations, including a clinic in Houston, which used to be the largest abortion facility in the Western Hemisphere. As part of the Big Beautiful Bill, the federal government now prevents Planned Parenthood from receiving Medicare and Medicaid reimbursement, at least for a period of 1 year. As a result, the abortion giant is closing over 24 clinics across the country. Texas Right to Life president Dr. John Seago called the closings an unmitigated victory for life. Pro-life activist Lila Rose had this to say at a recent rally.
Because we love life, and because life is worth fighting for, and children deserve to live, and women deserve better than Planned Parenthood.
In addition, the Center for Trans Youth Health and Development at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, America's largest transgender youth clinic, shut its doors in response to an executive order from President Trump banning the practice of chemical and surgical mutilation of children. With the Trump administration battling on the front lines, hopefully we can bring about the end of one of the ugliest chapters of healthcare in American history. And lastly, a mom in Oregon won a huge court victory over a state policy that prevented her from adopting because of her Christian beliefs. The state of Oregon had banned widowed mom Jessica Bates from adopting foster children because she would not agree to the state's rules that prospective parents applying to adopt children from foster care must agree to, quote, respect, accept, and support the children's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. Bates refused to agree to those terms, and with the help from the legal group Alliance Defending Freedom, won a victory in the U.S. Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who said the rule likely violates the mom's First Amendment rights. Bates' attorneys filed the lawsuit against the state of Oregon in 2023 when her fight to adopt began. That's it for now. Be sure to like, subscribe, follow, comment, and engage with us so that YouTube and all the socials push it out to more viewers. Thanks for watching DFE News. News done right. See you next time.